students. So, today we will be dealing with some nonlinear systems. Now, linear systems have comparatively very simple dynamics. So, if you observe linear systems, you will either find that the dynamics are taking some kind of exponential decay or there is some exponential growth. On the contrary to that, when we look into nonlinear systems are seen to having some property which is neither exponential decay nor exponential growth, and it is also observed that they are not even stable in terms of their dynamics. So, this is where you can observe some kind of chaos. So, roughly we define chaos to have this 3 ingredients and these 3 ingredients are unpredictability, undecomposability, and an element of regularity. Now, if we try to see this aspects, we can try to look into some kind of examples here. So, the first example that we take here will be Baker's transformation. Now, what is Baker's transformation? So, it is something like how the baker kneads the flour, right. So, the baker wants to make some cake or wants to make some bread, and for making a bread he needs to dough. So, when he is dowing, what he does is he stretches the dough, right, folds it back, right, and then again the combined thing he stretches it up and then again folds it back. So, this is how the baker has been doing his, like for many years, this is how the baker has been making his dough. So, something similar we can try to imitate in terms of mathematical definition. So, we start with say I equal to, let me take I square to be 0 1 square, and we are all working in terms of r square. We let our lambda be between 0 and half, and we define f from I square to I square as f of x y is say 2x lambda y for 0 less than or equal to x less than or equal to half and 0 less than or equal to y less than or equal to 1. And on the other part we define it to be 2x minus 1 and again lambda y plus half for half less than or equal to x less than or equal to 1 and again 0 less than or equal to y less than or equal to 1. What can we think about this kind of transformation? So, we can say that this transformation is something which stresses I square. Now, I square is basically a 1 cross 1 rectangle. So, it kind of stretches our I square into a 2 cross lambda rectangle. So, the y coordinate is basically diminished, right. So, the y side is diminished to lambda and the x side is stretched to double, right. So, it is stretched in that manner and then we cut it. So, this is basically not a continuous transformation because we are cutting the rectangle into 2 pieces. So, we cut the rectangle into 1 cross lambda 2 1 cross lambda rectangles and then we place one over the other, right, with a gap of 1 minus 2 lambda in between. We are placing one rectangle over the other. So, how does this transformation look? Maybe we can look into this picture. So, we have this 1 cross 1 rectangle or basically a square over here, which we sort of elongated from the x direction to 2x right. So, we are applying 2x here and we are applying lambda y here. So, there is a contraction in the y direction, there is an expansion in the x direction, and then what we are doing is we are trying to cut this into two parts, right. So, we are cutting it into two parts. So, we place one part over here. So, basically your 0 to half, right. So, this is 0 to half which is placed over here. So, for x being between 0 and half, we place this rectangle here, y is again shrinked to lambda. So, this is placed over here, and since we cut it over here, we are pasting the other half above it, right. So, we place it in the other half in this particular term. So, what we have is the other half, that is from x equal to half to x equal to 1, right, we have placed it over here. So, this gives us the Baker transformation, and then we try to look into the iterations of this. So, we are basically not only iterating a point, basically we are iterating the entire domain. So, we try to iterate this, and maybe at some kind of iterations we will get these kind of steps. Now, you can very well imagine what happens when we keep on repeating this process. So, whenever we keep on repeating this process, every time the length of the y or whatever the y length is, right, that gets reduced by lambda, and since I have already assumed my lambda to be less than half, right. So, lambda to the power n tends to 0 as n tends to infinity. So, what you find is that towards the end, right, you will have some sort of Cantor set here, right, a line of basically you will have straight lines, right, which are almost like a basically on, or you can say on the y coordinate you will have a Cantor set. So, this is Cantor set cross straight lines that you can see over here. So, you will find this array of straight lines, right, which almost appear like Cantor set. So, this is one kind of a fractal that you can see here. Now, the question is this unpredictable? Definitely unpredictable, because if you see that points which are very close by, right, they are almost going up very far apart, and then after so many steps we do not know where these points have landed. So, points which are very close, they move apart. The second thing what we observe here is that you cannot decompose it, right, because if you try to decompose it, of course, this entire part is made up from this one, right. So, we cannot think of this into separate pieces of dynamics, right. All the dynamics is basically involved in each other. So, at every step what you get is you get two rectangles here, then again the rectangle from here comes here, a rectangle from here goes there. So, this kind of dynamics is basically involved in each other, right. So, we do not find them to be decomposed into two pieces, and the other thing which we find is constantly some kind of regularity. So, what is this regularity that we see here? So, you can easily check using the equations that if I take this point 1 by 3 and this point 1 by twice 1 minus lambda square, if I look into this particular point gets mapped to 2 by 3 lambda upon twice 1 minus lambda square, and again when I want to map this particular, when I take the function again applied to this particular point, I find that this gets mapped back to itself. So, we find that there is a periodic point of period 2, and in fact, it is not very difficult to see that this will have periodic points of all periods. So, we do have some kind of regularity here, because there are periodic points and we know that periodic points have fixed orbits. So, there are periodic points and they are going to have their orbits are going to be stable in the sense that their orbits are going to be very regular, right. They occur at each interval, you will find them after finitely many steps coming back to themselves. So, you find a sense of regularity here also. So, we look into next example. So, we take this example of solenoid. So, let us look into this example of solenoid. So, what is this solenoid? So, let me take this circle S, right. So, this is a circle of radius r greater than 1, and we want to take this unit disc So, I am taking B square, which is a unit disk in the plane. Now, I am defining this D to be equal to S cross B. So, this gives me a solid torus in R cube. So, we have a solid torus in R cube, and now we want to define some kind of a map on this. So, we define a function f from D to D as where again we know what is the meaning of e to the power I 2 pi theta, right, just the points cos 2 pi theta and sin 2 pi theta. How do we basically describe this dynamics? Now, think what happens in the theta coordinate. So, there are two coordinates here, one coordinate coming from the circle S, one coordinate coming from the unit disk. Now, what happens to the coordinate from circle S? So, the coordinate from circle S, right, it is just period doubling here, right. So, you find that theta goes to 2 theta, right. So, it is just the angle doubling here, right. So, angle gets doubled over here. What happens to the coordinate in B? Now, we know that B is basically a unit disk. So, it is a disk of radius 1. What we are doing is that for this disk of radius 1, right, any point there would be a disk of radius 1. So, it would be something like within this radius. What happens is it becomes, we are shrinking it up, right. So, we are shrinking. So, the whole disk gets shrink by, say here we have taken 1 by 10. So, it is getting shrink by 1 by 10, and plus what do we mean by half e to the power I 2 theta, that it is not remaining at the center, right. We are also dislocating the center, right, by say 2 pi I theta is a full circle. So, we are just dislocating it by a certain angle, right. So, what happens here is that if I now want to look into the dynamics here, so let us try to see what happens over here. So, supposing now this is a solid torus, right. So, I am just taking a cross section here, what happens to the cross section here. So, I have a cross section here, right. Supposing this cross section I have this b theta star, right. So, at the point theta equal to theta star, I am looking into this cross section here. Now, I already know that what happens any point over here, since theta star is mapped to be twice theta star, right. So, this cross section basically would be mapped to something which I can denote here it as b twice theta star. And what happens now to the whole disk here? Now, this is a disk of radius 1, right. So, we find that this disk of radius 1 is now shrunk to a disk of radius 1 by 10, right. So, wherever the point P is, right, we are basically looking into the magnitude basically decreases by 1 by 10, and then this whole disk, right, is also revolving. So, we are also giving it some kind of a push, it is not centered, it is not where it was centered, but now all the points are also moving along a circle, right, with this particular term. So, what we find is that this particular disk in b twice theta star in this particular cross section is mapped somewhere over here. Now, if I look into what happens to b of theta star plus pi, what happens to this cross section? Then this cross section is also mapped onto b to twice theta star, right. If I look into this cross section was mapped here, right, in b twice theta star, and if we look into what happens to this cross section, so this cross section is also mapped into b twice theta star, because that is how it goes, right. But again I am mapping here is half e to the power I 2 pi theta, So, again that gets mapped, but then here the angle here is dislocated by half on one side, but because of this presence of pi it is again dislocated on by half on the other side. So, what you get here is that this angle turns out to be something of this order. So, this disk gets mapped. So, basically I can say that this disk was mapped to this particular part and this disk get maps to this particular part. So, what you find is that within that cross section, if you want to look into the image, right, the image you will find that there are the cross section you will find two disks, right, which are a little bit apart from each other, they do not intersect, they are apart from each other, and that is why we have reduced the radius here. We have reduced the radius considerably so that they do not intersect. So, what do you actually get in this term? So, if you try to say in this particular terms, right, what happens to the entire torus now? So, I want to look into what happens to the torus now. So, supposing we say that this is our torus, right. Now, in this torus, this is our circle, right, S, and then this is our disk. So, basically there are two components here, right. This is basically our circle S, right, and this is what our disk was. Now, we know what happens in the disk, it gets double, but circle what happens here is, because this is elongated twice, but again we are putting that back into itself. So, what you get here is that this particular torus is mapped into again a bigger torus, right. We are basically reducing the what to say, we are contracting the diameter here. So, the diameter is contracted, but the length is elongated, and then after elongating the length, what we try to do is we try to push that back on itself, right. So, what we do is we are arranging the disk something like this. So, we have the disk something like this coming up, or I could maybe use another color to show this. So, what happens here is that you find that this particular disk was contracted back on itself, now this you can easily see that this transformation is continuous, we are not cutting it anywhere, right, we are just folding it and putting it back to itself. Now, what happens? So, this is how you can see the picture here, and what happens now if you take one more iteration? So, what happens when you are taking one more iteration? Again you are looking into this torus, now you have two bands of circles, right. So, in both the bands now you are elongating the two bands, right, you are again folding that and putting it back to itself, right. So, the global picture looks something like this. So, here you have two circles here, right, you had these two bands, and now I am looking into what happens. You cut over here and look into the two bands, what happens here is you again find that there are two disks, right. What you find is that there are again two disks. So, there is again two disks folded into itself, and in the cross section you can see that, right. This was the original disk, right. The original disk, if you see a cross section, now we have in this cross section we find two disks, but again if you take what happens inside it, you again find two small disks, right. And again if you see what happens in the two small disks, right, you will again find that there are smaller disks here. You find some smaller disk here, again two parts over here. So, if you try to look into this fact, what happens towards the end? So, basically if you try to keep on iterating it, right, where does it lend to? So, find that this will be a highly fibrous kind of picture, right. If you see what happens towards the end, it is highly fibrous kind of picture where you see lot of line segments, right, and each cross section you will find that this highly fibrous figure that you get in towards the end, right, if you take a cross section of that, what you find here is a Cantor set. So, this fibrous picture is basically what is called a solenoid, and that is one more example where you can see some kind of unpredictability. Now, let us look into this picture once again. So, this was our D, right. What I see, the green part here is your f of D, and what we find here is that f of D is a subset of D. Now, since f of D is a subset of D, what you find here is that f square D will be a subset of f of D. So, if you look into this sequence, right, f to the power n D, right, this happens to be a decreasing sequence of compact sets. So, this is a decreasing sequence of compact sets, and so the total intersection will be non-empty. So, our solenoid is basically lambda, which we can describe as the total intersection of this discs. This is our solenoid, and we see that this is a non-empty structure, and again if we try to look into what is the dynamics on the solenoid. Now, we know that since the way the solenoid is defined, right, this solenoid is an invariant set. So, f of lambda will be same as lambda, right, this is an invariant set. So, what happens to the dynamics of f on the solenoid now? So, we try to look into the dynamics of f on the solenoid, you will again find this kind of regularity, right, you will find some kind of unpredictability, and you will find undecomposability. So, you will not be able to decompose it into two parts, it remains as it is, because we know that points are again in the solenoid, the points are going to move around, right, according to the rule f. So, this solenoid and this Baker's map that we have seen, these are basically examples which are giving us some kind of chaos using some kind of stretching and folding. So, we are using these concepts of stretching and folding to get these examples, and we are not getting into details into mathematics here, but we will study all these properties in detail in another prototype model. So, what is this prototype model? So, we look into this prototype model which we call as horseshoe. Now, what is this model? How did it basically term up? So, this is not just an ordinary horseshoe, we always call it a Smale horseshoe. Now, it was something around say 19th century when people started discussing about chaos, whether chaos is possible. Of course, people had thought of some kind of structures like Baker's map, etc., etc. But when chaos was being discussed, many times it was considered that in mathematics this is not possible. The concept of chaos, right, cannot be described mathematically, it is not possible to have it in mathematics, and it is more kind of an imaginative concept than a kind of practical concept. So, because if you want to look into something practical concept, you should have equations describing them. So, it is more of imaginative thing than a practical thing, it is not possible. But there were two British mathematicians. So, this is Mary Cartwright and John Littlewood. Now, this was the time of World War and they were studying some kind of equations related to radio waves that were being used in the World War. So, during such a kind of study they came across some kind of equations, and when they tried to analyze these kind of equations, they were the first one to predict that chaos is possible. In mathematical equations. Of course, they gave their own theory, and then it was later Norman Levinson Norman Levinson, he tried to analytically study these equations. Now, when Norman Levinson was analytically studying these equations, he did talk to few other mathematicians, and one of them was Stephen Smale. So, Stephen Smale was originally a topologist, and is best known for his work on Poincaré's conjecture. So, Stephen Smale was a topologist who was working in some kind of geometric topology, and Norman Levinson, he sent him his analytical details of looking into these equations and looking into this concept of chaos. So, Stephen Smale thought of applying some kind of his geometric ideas to this analytical equations that he had seen, and in trying to establish this, of course, there is a big story behind it, that at that time Stephen Smale was on sabbatical, and he was basically on a beach in, so he was basically on a beach in Lemay at Rio. So, he had this concept in mind, and he was trying to look into how to geometrically describe this analytical study of Levinson, and at that time what he realized was that, of course, what you do at a beach is always you go to the beach and try to draw something, and that is what he tried to do, and he came across a mathematical model of this analytical study. So, he made some kind of mathematical model. So, he made a model to describe the analytical study of Levinson. So, he tried to make this particular model, and it was because of the shape of this graph that he had taken up, or the image. So, it was because of the shape of this image of this, of the domain of the map, that this model is called horseshoe. So, let us try to study this horseshoe, and let us now look into this model. It is basically called Smale's horseshoe. So, let us look into this model, Smale's horseshoe. Now, how do we describe this mathematically? So, we again take our D to be the set of all x y in R square, right, where 0 is less than x is less than 1, 0 is less than or equal to y less than or equal to 1. So, you are taking basically again the rectangle, the square, basically unit square, and you define f from D to R square. Now, the description of this f is not very mathematical. What ideally you do is that f contracts the x direction it expands the y direction and it twists D lying on itself. So, roughly how f x here is that you have this kind of a unit square here, now what is f doing is it is contracting the x direction, right, and it is expanding the y direction. So, I can say that what f does here is that this x direction is being contracted, right. So, you contracted the x direction, you expanded the y direction, and you are expanding in such a way that now you want to twist the whole image, right, and put it back over where D was. So, what you are doing here is exactly you are twisting this image, right. So, you are turning this image around and you want to put that back on itself. So, you put it back around itself. So, what you get here is you get some part of it is lost, right. If you look into what happens into D, right, you have twisted it and put on D, right. So, you find that there is some part of D which is again coming back into D, and there is some part of D which is lost, right, because this part is completely lost. So, you lose this part and some part comes into D. So, ideally we can define f not exactly completely, because this is a very non-linear kind of description that he has taken up, where we cannot have mathematical equations to describe this, but we can define it on some kind of horizontal rectangles. So, let us take this to be our horizontal rectangles. So, we try to take up maybe, so we take this unit square and try to define this horizontal rectangles H0 and H1, and we define this on this map affine, we define an affine description, we define it affinely on this horizontal rectangles, where we are looking into this horizontal rectangles, what is H0 and what is H1. So, our H0 happens to be the set of all x y such that 0 is less than or equal to x is less than or equal to 1, and 0 is less than or equal to y is less than or equal to 1 by mu. So, we want to know what is our mu. So, we assume our mu to be greater than 2. So, here this is 0, this is 1, and we define this to be H0 to be from y going from 0 to 1 by mu. So, we have 1 by mu here. And what is my H1? So, my H1 happens to be equal to again all x y such that 0 is less than or equal to x is less than or equal to 1, and what is your y? So, your y lies between 1 minus 1 by mu less than or equal to y is less than or equal to 1. So, this is your H1. So, this is 1 minus 1 by mu and this is 1. Now, you are defining f affinely on this, right. So, you define it in such a manner that f of H0 is V0, and if I want to say what is V0, I define my V0 to be equal to x y such that 0 is less than or equal to x is less than lambda, and 0 is less than or equal to y is less than or equal to 1. Then the question is what is lambda? So, we take lambda to be greater than, say it is greater than 0, but maybe we want our lambda to be less than half. So, we start, this is my lambda. So, my lambda is less than half here, and we define f in such a manner that f on H1 happens to be equal to V1, where my V1 is the set of all x y such that 1 minus lambda is less than or equal to x is less than or equal to 1, and 0 is less than or equal to y is less than or equal to 1. So, I want to take this in such a manner. So, if I am looking into this equation, so I am looking into this fact, what happens here is that I am looking into this particular part, right, this rectangle, and we want to say that our V0 is such that, right. So, x lies between 0 and lambda, and y lies between 0 and 1. So, this is basically my V naught, and I want to define my V 1, right, where x lies between 1 minus lambda to 1, right, and y goes between 0 and 1. And we are mapping it in such a manner that f of h naught is equal to V naught and f of h 1 is equal to V 1. We can precisely state this in terms of equations. And what are these equations? So, I am taking this h naught, and on this h naught I am defining my x y. So, my f is defined in such a manner that this vector f y is mapped by f x y, and on h 1 I am defining my x y mapped by f 2 minus lambda 0 0 minus mu x y plus 1. Now, why did we take the minus sign over here? So, as you have noticed this, what we are doing is we are stretching this, right, and then we are putting it back on itself. So, when we put in the back on itself, right, we are basically changing the orientation, right. So, the 0 part is being mapped onto the 1 part, right. We are changing the orientation because we are putting it back on itself in a horseshoe form. So, we have this negative sign here. So, we can finally define this map on h naught and h 1, and we can easily see that f of h naught will be equal to V naught and f of h 1 is equal to V 1, where in V 1, right, it is going on like the increasing x, right. What you find is that the increasing y is being mapped onto the decreasing x. So, this is what is basically your figure here. So, you have your h naught and h 1, right, and your h naught and h 1 you are defining your f in such a manner that basically this is elongated, right. So, you get h naught here, you get h 1 here because you are contracting the x direction, you are expanding the y direction, and since you have put this in form of a horseshoe, right, you start with here, you put this here, right, you get your V naught here, this is the missing part here which goes out of the rectangle or out of the square basically, and what you find is h 1 now is mapped in such a manner that this particular portion is mapped here, right. So, you get it mapped into this particular manner, and this is basically your f of h naught which is V naught and your f of h 1 which is V 1. Now, you could also think of defining this in the reverse manner. So, you can also think of f inverse acting on D. So, we find that f inverse acting on D, right, is defined in such a manner that if I take my V naught, right, which is basically x y, what happens under f inverse? So, under f inverse, right, this is mapped in terms of say 1 by lambda mu. So, this is mapped in terms of 1 by lambda 0 0 1 by mu times x y, and V 1 is mapped again because we have a twisting here, you have a negative sign here. So, define f inverse also similarly, and if I now want to look into f inverse, now f inverse is defined not completely, but f inverse is defined on V naught and V 1. So, if we try to now look into how f inverse is defined, so this is how f inverse gets defined. So, we find that you have V naught which is basically a rectangle lambda cross 1, right, of dimension lambda cross 1. So, we find that V naught, right, what happens, what does this map do is that it is basically expanding the x direction and contracting the y direction, right, and now the y direction is contracted in such a manner that you map V naught is mapped onto h naught by f inverse, right, and V 1 is mapped into h 1, right, it goes in this particular direction. or I should say it should be taken in the other way round. Sorry, this is my H1, this is my H0 and this is my H1. It is mapped into this particular direction, right. Your V0 is mapped into H0, you place it over here, then you take this part, you twist this part which we don't care of, right, and then V1 is mapped into H1, right, you place it over here. Now, what happens if you look into this map? What is the mathematical significance of this map, or basically what is the geometric significance of this map? So, we can see a small lemma here. So, let us look into a small lemma here. I should not say it is a lemma, it is just an observation, but you look into this observation, it says that suppose V is a vertical rectangle then f of V intersection D consists of two vertical rectangle and on the other hand suppose H is a horizontal rectangle then f inverse H intersection D consists of two horizontal rectangles. Now, let us try to see this in the picture here. So, what I have here is I have my D here, now in this particular D I am looking into a vertical rectangle here. So, let me try to see, let me call this as my vertical rectangle. So, this is my vertical rectangle V. Now, how is this mapped? So, we know that what we are trying to do is, right, how does f act here is, right, that we are trying to elongate the y part, right, and then putting it back onto itself, right. So, what we get here is under f what you find here is this is how the whole D is mapped, because here I can divide this into say H0 and H1, right, and then we know that this H0 part is mapped onto this one, the H1 part is mapped onto this one. So, how is this vertical rectangle being mapped to? So, this vertical rectangle is being mapped like this. So, you find that this vertical rectangle, right, is mapped something in this manner, and then what is f of V intersection D? So, we find that f of V intersection D is again two vertical rectangles, right. Again what happens to H? So, if I take any horizontal rectangle, so I can think of some horizontal rectangle, say I take a horizontal rectangle here and I call it H, right. How is f inverse being mapped to? Now, we very well know what how f inverse maps, right, it maps V0 to H0, it maps V1 to H1. So, what you find here is that this horizontal rectangle would be mapped in such a manner. So, we know that this is basically mapped, how is this mapped? So, this is mapped something like this form. So, how is this horizontal rectangle being mapped? So, this horizontal rectangle would be mapped something in this particular form. And so, if I take F inverse H, so this is like how my F inverse maps, right. So, this is how F inverse is mapping. So, if I take my F inverse of H and if I map it, intersect it with D, I get two horizontal rectangles. So, horizontal rectangles, so vertical rectangles under F are mapped to vertical rectangles, so then we get two vertical rectangles there. Of course, they are diminished or basically they are contracted, right. And for a horizontal rectangle under F inverse, we find that a horizontal rectangle is mapped to two horizontal rectangles and again they are contracted. So, how does my F function? So, the bigger concept here is, we can see this part figure, how is F acting now? So, we start looking into this figure, right. Now, when I am looking into what is my D intersection F of D, we know that we had two vertical rectangles here, V naught and V 1, right, because that is how H naught is mapped, because my V naught is nothing but it is basically F of H naught and my V 1 is nothing but it is my F of H 1, right. So, this is how we had mapped H naught and H 1. Now, I particularly now want to look into how does D intersection F D intersection F square D work out. Now, we know that we have vertical rectangles V naught and V 1. So, V naught will give rise to two vertical rectangles, right, under F it will give rise to two vertical rectangles, and if I look into V 1, so V 1 is going to again give rise to two vertical rectangles over here. So, we can say that these vertical rectangles we can call them as V naught naught, right, V naught 1. So, basically V naught naught is mapped here, V 1 1 is mapped here, V naught 1 is mapped here, V 1 1 gets mapped here and this is V 1 0. So, we find that this gives rise to 4. Now, what I have is in D intersection F D intersection F square D, I get 4 vertical rectangles, right. So, these are the 4 vertical rectangles that you can get here. So, this is one vertical rectangle, this is another one, right, this is the third one and this is the fourth one, and I can name it from where it is coming from. So, from V naught, if I apply again V naught into, so V naught will have two parts. So, one will be V 0 0 and one will be V 0 1, and V 1 will have two parts, which is V 1 1 and V 1 0. Now, what happens if I take it further? So, if I take it further, right, what will I get here? So, let us look into this part. Now, I am just stretching up this part, right. So, this is what is my F of D intersection F D intersection F square D, right. When we stretch it further, we get again two parts here. So, I am just trying to draw this part over here. So, now if I look into each of this part, what happens is each vertical rectangle here is giving rise to two vertical rectangles. So, I can say that here I find so many parts. I can say that this is my V naught naught naught, right. This happens to be my V naught naught 1, right. This was originally my part of V 0 1. So, we find that this has two parts here. So, this part is V 0 1 0. I find this part which I can name as V 0 1 1, right. I find this part which was originally my V10. So, we find that this is V100 and this part I can say that this was 101, right, and this particular portion which was originally my V11, we find it as V110 and this is my V111. So, what I find is that at each step, right, we are getting vertical rectangles. Now, if you look into the vertical rectangles, right, basically if you look into their width, right, their width is basically decreasing, and you can imagine what happens if you continue this process, right. So, since again here I have my, right, this is a subset of this one, right. So, again we have decreasing sequence of compact sets, and so the total intersection will be non-empty, and that is what is the Smale horseshoe. But the Smale horseshoe is a little bit more than that, because here we are also looking into what is F inverse. So, I can think of D intersection F inverse D, right. So, we can also think of D intersection F inverse D, right, and then I can again look into intersection F minus 2D, where now what will happen is D intersection F inverse D is going to give me horizontal rectangles, right. So, I keep on getting more and more horizontal rectangles, right. How do we perfectly define the Smale horseshoe is something which we will be seeing next time, right, because that still involves a lot of analysis. So, today we stop here.